Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said he dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then, and was just talking king in pre-Facebook years, but there was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed that he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate the conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was all he told me about this NoEnd house. It got to me in the name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building, and you win 500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly about 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried it and failed, and he was a heroin and who knows what the hell addicted, so I figured that the drug's the best of him, and he wigged out a pepper ghost or something. He told me that it would be too much for anyone. It was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him that I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived immediately, I noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but if for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked towards the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let out a relieved sigh, as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby, decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in a place of a worker, read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more to follow, reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled a Halloween aisle of that of Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that have a static growl when you pass by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed off through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped in terms of technology. Not only there was a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary they seem to have a Halloween soundtrack, that one that you find in a 99-cent store on a loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats and wheeled around and walked in with chest puffed across the next area. When I reached the doorknob, my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open the door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard that I could even barely think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 was when things started to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows, plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were a few others. I had barely walked in the door, and I was already terrified. It was at that moment I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think. I was automatically tried to open the door. I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Someone was locking the doors as I progressed, but there was no way. I would have heard them if it was a mechanical lock that set automatically. Maybe, but I was too scared to really think. I turned back into the room with the shadows and they were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made my way to the half point of the room. I looked down and took my steps, and that's when I saw it. or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out, but put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, unable to move. I am not afraid of the dark, and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All the sights had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, if I didn't know what I was doing, I would have never been able to tell. Darkness didn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you could still hear yourself breathing. You could still hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after moments, rapidly beating the heart, the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure if there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly, but barely see even my own nose. I knew it was there. Although regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me. But I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me. Inching closer, I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I couldn't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared. I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. When the lights flashed for a second, I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing. And I know I saw nothing there. The room was once again plunged in the darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest, and I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into the room lot 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict, and I have no history of drug abuse or some kind of psychosis, short childhood of hallucinations I mentioned earlier. And those were only when I was just really tired or just waking up. I entered the NoEnd house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of the room 5 was from my back. Looking up at the ceiling of what I saw didn't scare me. It just simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings of this room were taller than the others, which made me think, was I the center of the house when I got up to the floor? I dusted myself off and then took a look around. It was definitely the biggest of them all. I couldn't even see the door I was at. Various bush and trees that must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I had to figure out where the rooms are, and they were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. So I assumed whatever it was in the room stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in the room. That was when the thing bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big the house was. From the outside, I first walked up to it. It looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but it was almost a full forest in there. A canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed that it was still there. However, how high it was, I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was inside was that the floor that matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping the next tree I passed will reveal the door. After moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt 10 more land on my skin at different places, then felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face, and sitting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was so desperate. I hate bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. As I began to crawl, I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I hadn't seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up mindlessly, and dealing with whatever it was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it. A low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert, and the feeling of the bugs lessened on me as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on top of the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I could make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shaking, grasping the doorknob. The hum was so loud that I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, and my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum surrounding me as the doorknob clicked into place. The hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. It looked like in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but the correct amounts of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but that moment I felt what I knew it was instantly. I didn't scream, and I didn't make a sound. At first I scratched softly. The walls were tough, but I knew the door was somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I crawled at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in my room was incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there, and I knew it was just there. I knew if I could get past this wall. "Are you all right?" I jumped off the ground and spun in motion. I leaned against the wall and saw what had happened to be spoken to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl who was wearing a soft white dress went down to her ankles. She had a long blonde hair that reached the middle of her back, and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. And I know that something in my life will never be unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. There, where she stood, what looked to be in a man's body, only larger than normal, covered in hair. She had no clothes on from head to toe, but this head was not human, and the toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might have been. The form of the head of a ram, and the snout of the wolf. It was horrifying, and the obnoxious from the little girl in front of me. Where they were coming from the same form, I can't really describe it, but I saw at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl in the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could even barely see. My mind had been revolting against what is a tempting process. I had been that scared before in my life, and I never had been more scared than I ever was trapped in that 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped in there, and then it spoke again. "David, you should have listened." When it spoke, I heard the words of a little girl from another spoke through my mind. In a voice I won't even attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off of what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, and my eyes were wide at the form looking down at me, scurrying across the floor. In front of me was a battery powdered rats from the second room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever the depths it was headed. I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't going to be up to taking it a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, and the voice growing louder at the form. As I stayed and rooted where it stood, I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all four, and then just turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering to my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on my back and my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangular was scratched onto the woods, with a small dent chipped in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7, and I had mindlessly attached to the wall. I knew it was room 7. Just beyond that wall was room 5 moments ago. I didn't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just a state of my mind at the time. But I had created the door. I know I had. In my madness, I had scratched onto the wall that I needed the most. An exit to the next room. Room 7 was close, and I knew the demon was right behind me. But for some reason, it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both my hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me that I was never leaving. It told me that it was the end. But I wasn't going to die. I was going to live in there to get to room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push my way through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted to the room as I was entered. It was just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to, I turned around back to the 7 and just jumped back slightly. What I saw was at the door. It wasn't the one I had scratched on, but a rectangular door with the large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the doorknob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't, but if this was only room 6, then I could imagine 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the doorknob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed, and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stunned as I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw the door just as I went through. It was my entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice the shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving NoEnd house had faded. Dread was slowly building up in my stomach. I shook it off as a residential from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night. I reached up to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock as he never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended to my stairs and turned into my family room, and I saw what would forever be burned in their mind. However, my parents were lying on the ground, covered in blood. They were mutilated in near identical states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies. Their heads were placed on their chest, facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling, as if though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was in a mess. Then I saw it. It was a door, and it had never been there before. A door with a large 8 scrolled on it in blood. I was still in the house, and I was standing in the family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider than I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore in my mind, and they grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than it ever was before, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to taking my own life. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed like as if though they were going to crumble. But still the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me, and I was now between 2 bodies. A few feet away from the door, the dismembered hands crawled at their carpet towards me. All the while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want to hear their voices to match those parents. They began to open their mouths, and their hands were inches away from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door and threw it open, and then slammed it right behind me. That was room 8. I was done after what I had just experienced. I knew there wasn't anything else in this house that could throw at me that I can't even live through. There was some sort of fires of hell that I wasn't really ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of the NoEnd house. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of the rooms of 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man was sitting on the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer, and I had to get a better look at even I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked him. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He started sobbing now. You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to. He sat on the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. He was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in a very way. Listen, who are you? I was only now a few feet from my propaganda. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing here talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you? You're going to hurt me, and you're going to hurt me if you want to leave. You're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, all right? Let's try and figure this. Then I saw it. David was sitting down wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt that embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Please don't hurt me. My eyes didn't even have that smaller number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while, they got a little bit more obnoxious. 7 was scratched on the wall, but in my own hands. 8 was marked in blood in the bodies of my parents. But 9? This number was a person, a living person. Still worse, it was a person that looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yeah, you're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to my voice, but it was 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, in similarity to room 6. The door I came through was gone, and for some reason I assumed that scratching will get nowhere this time. I studied the walls and the floor of the chair, sticking my head underneath to see if there was anything below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife, attached to a tag what read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach I read on the tag was something similar, or sinister. I wanted to throw up. The last thing I ever wanted to do was to remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was still spinning into the attic of unanswerable questions. Who would put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that I was kneeled on the cold floor, and I sat in that chair sobbing in protest of hurting myself. It was too much to process. The house and management have been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason have turned to Peter and whatever had got this far. And even if he did, if he met Peter Terry sobbing on this chair, rocking back and forth, I would blank those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself off the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was actually going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly got up from the chair and stood facing me. It was uncanny. His height, and even though the way he stood matched mine, I still felt the rubber hilt of the knife on my hand. He gripped it tighter, and I didn't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. Now, his voice slightly deeper than my own. "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, the knife posed and ready. He looked up at me terrified. It was like I was looking in the mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked at myself. The hum was getting louder, and something deep inside snapped. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch of his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was nothing that I had ever experienced up to that point. The room was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling over after a while. I felt weightless, covered in the dark. Then deep sad comes over me. I felt lost and depressed, and really insane. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, and I had seen it, and my mind has trouble differentiating between what's real and what isn't. The only sadness deepened was the room 9 for what seemed like days. The final room, and that's exactly what it was, the end. The NoEnd house had ever end, and I reached it. At that moment I gave up. I knew what would be in between this state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses, and I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. It then happened. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up below me that I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked towards the light. As I approached the light, it was a vehicle slid down out of the unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I had started. The lobby of the NoEnd house was exactly how I left. It was still emptied, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything I had happened that night, I was still very worried of where I was. After moments of normality, I looked around the place, trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it, immensely curious yet still cautious. I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams, congratulations. You've made to the end of NoEnd House. Please accept this prize as a token of our great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked to my car and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled in the driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house and laughed as I saw a small tent etched into the wood. Well, my pretties, that was NoEnd House, a creepypasta written by Brian Russell. My final thoughts on this story. I gotta be brutally fair. This was actually a really well-made creepypasta. You know, I actually do know for a fact that there are other series to the NoEnd House. Some series like NoEnd House 1, 2, 3, and etc. I don't exactly know if I will do the other ones and review those ones, but I'm considering in doing so, but I'm not really sure because, that will depend if I have time to read them or not. But with that being said and with that being the case, I honestly thought this story was really well made and it was very well written in any way because of the fact that, the grammar's good, the sentence structuring, the storyline. It's just a really awesome and well made story. I mean, I do know Mr. Creepypasta narrated this one as well as Creepypasta, and I do know for a fact there's a couple other ones that have did this story. It's actually a really well made concept, especially with this protagonist going through all the rooms, and it's pretty messed up, but it's still a really good story. I really have to say there is definitely a lot of time and effort when it came to, reading this story. And I've been wanting to get to this story for, quite a while, actually. I've been actually wanting to get to this story for quite a little while, but I'm able to get to this story finally, to which it's flat out amazing. So, I mean, the fact that the protagonist has been hallucinating as a kid, but when the protagonist walked in through the house and all the rooms, I have a feeling he was having all these hallucinations, or maybe he experienced some paranormal things from, the spiritual spirits that were in the house. I'm assuming that's what actually happened, but we never would really know because this story, it gives out, some sort of questions that leaves us to think why that's the case or something. It honestly really gives me a really good feeling when it came to this story. So, the grammar of the story, it's really good. Like, I really appreciate how good the grammar was, as well as the sentence structuring. I could read it just fine. I maybe stuttered on a couple words, but other than that, I was able to read it clearly with no problems. I was able to, read through the plot of the story. It has a really interesting plot to it. I mean, this is actually one of the popular creepypastas, so I thought I'd give this a read. So, I guess with that being said, and with that being the case, yeah. And yet again, I'm not really sure when I will be reviewing the NoEnd House other series like 2 or 3. I can't really guarantee when I will get to it or if I ever do because, that will have to depend if I have time or something. But like I said, it depends. But I guess with that being said, what do you guys think of this story? But before I wrap up, I'm going to say this is just simply my own personal opinion. And if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is just simply my own personal thoughts. I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10. It's a really awesome creepypasta. Brilliantly well made and written. There's definitely a lot of time and effort into it. And I do notice that there are other sequels to this. So I might give the other sequels a go if I ever have time. But I can't guarantee when that will be. But I guess we'll see whenever I decide to get the opportunity to read it. Anyways, what did you guys personally think of this creepypasta? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to leave me what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Lion Queen. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, and if you're new to this channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.